The HOA sent me a bill that didn't exist, a paper slip that called my dock, an unauthorized structure, and tacked on $3,000 in penalties, and when I laughed at it on my porch, Marla Brent walked up my driveway like she owned the place, eyes hard, clipboard ready, and that was the day everything started to fall apart. I never expected a quiet life by Willow Ridge would turn into a slow, ugly shove one where neighbors pick sides, officers get called, and someone threatens to turn a homeowners meeting into something nobody should ever see. But here we are, and I want to tell you exactly how it played out, because the small fights are the ones that tell you who people really are. I lived on the corner lot, the one with the broken wood dock and the faded Adirondack chairs that my dad left me. It was nothing special, a bungalow with a sagging roof and a garden that mostly survived on neglect, but the view at dusk made the bills and noise worth it. That Saturday morning I was out with a cup of coffee, watching a pair of swans carve the water, when Marlo appeared, like a character from a different life. Hair too perfect, shoes too clean, and a clipboard that announced she was in charge. "This is final notice," she said, not even asking to step onto the porch. "You owe the association back fees for unauthorized improvements." "Unauthorized improvements?" I said. "I built that dock 30 years ago, permits, paperwork, everything. You know this." Her lips thinned. She produced a letter, the kind that's more posture than proof, and she read off line items that had clearly been invented. Emergency community fund, landscape restitution, administrative penalty items that did not exist in our covenant. She said them like they were gospel. She wasn't asking, she was enforcing. When I showed her the county permit folder, her smile didn't soften. Instead, she folded the paper, slid it back into her clipboard, and told me, flatly, that I'd have 7 days. That evening, a sheriff's cruiser rolled slowly past my house. I thought it was coincidence, the way people mistake routine for something more ominous. Then a deputy pulled into my driveway and asked if I was the one with the disputed property. He'd received a complaint, Marla's complaint, saying I had become hostile and a disturbance when she came by. I handed him the permit binder. He thumbed through it, polite but not particularly invested, and said it was civil, not criminal. Still, the engine hummed like a threat. The real escalation wasn't legal in the clean sense, it was chemical. It was the way she started stitching threads together: a friend on the board, a whispered meeting at the coffee shop, a text to one of the inspectors saying she'd heard things. Envelopes started appearing on certain doors, final notice HOA. No return address. Sometimes it was late at night, slipped under the mat. Sometimes it was taped to the mailbox. It was intimidation dressed up as procedure, and folks began to fidget. At the emergency HOA meeting Marla called, the community center smelled of stale coffee and the kind of tension that builds when people know something ugly is coming. She stood at the podium like a judge, voice clear, and walked the room through her narrative. Unauthorized structures, unpaid dues, the idea that someone had decided they could live outside of rules. She painted me as the exception, the troublemaker. When she finished, there was a silence that felt like a held breath. I stood up because that's what you do when someone's telling lies in front of the people you care about. And I didn't plan my words, I just told the truth as plainly as I could. "You've got my permits," I said, and the room watched the papers move like an acrobat. "You have the inspections. If there's a complaint, show me the complaint. Don't make up fees and call it law." A woman named Sophia Reyes, our neighbor who runs the bait shop down by the inlet, raised her hand. "When did we vote on a community stipend?" she asked. "When did we vote on this administrative penalty?" Her voice had a practical edge. She's the kind of person who runs a register and doesn't have time for drama. People shifted. Faces that had been placid began to change into something more human, skeptical. Marla's response was a slow veneer of righteousness cracking. "We follow procedures," she insisted. "We have records." Except she didn't. Under the fluorescent lights, someone checked the HOA ledger, the real one, and the entries didn't match the charges she'd read. There were no minutes authorizing her to collect a morale fund. There were no signatures approving extra stipends. The hard thing about being in a small town is that a lie is often only a sentence away from being exposed by someone who remembers the meeting, the voice, the vote. That's when she doubled down. She called a second meeting and, this time, came with a man none of us knew well, his jaw set, sunglasses indoors, a presence like a cloud before a storm. Rumors travel fast. He'd been seen in the parking lot threatening someone at a past association event. He claimed to be an enforcement advisor and waived another list of charges. Somebody in the back said he'd flashed a badge like he had the power to make things happen, but he wasn't law. He was a man who'd learned you can get people to obey if they believe you're important. At that second meeting, things went south quick. Marla accused me of stealing from the HOA. She said I'd tampered with community property. I laughed. It's what you do to keep your mouth from shaking, and she leaned into the microphone and called for an immediate vote to fine me. People murmured. Some of Marla's supporters, those who believed in order, in the neatness of a neighborhood where rules mean safety, nodded. Others looked like they'd stepped into a movie they didn't sign up for. Then someone in the back shouted, "Heard you on a phone call about the compensation, Marla?" We never discussed it in a session. The room split into pockets of opinion. Sophia produced a recording she'd kept from a committee meeting months ago. Marla's voice was on it, clear as a bell, suggesting a private reimbursement for herself that had not been ratified. The tape itself wasn't damning enough to convict a saint, but for a woman performing sainthood it hurt. And then the violence almost happened, and this is the part people remember because it was a cut between the normal and the monstrous. Marla's advisor, who'd shown up that afternoon, pulled something from his coat. It wasn't a gun, but it was a baton, the sort of thing people buy to feel bigger. He rattled it on the podium like someone flipping a coin. There were shouts. My heart slammed, and the room compressed into a moment of panic. Someone called the sheriff. Chairs scraped. People scrambled for phones. For a second, the meeting was exactly what we'd feared, a power play that could have ended in someone getting hurt. When the deputies arrived, they separated people, took statements, and in that half-lit hallway, my neighbor Ben Turner, a retired schoolteacher with hands like old oak, told an officer. She was making up charges to pay herself. "We've got minutes. We vote. We don't let one person run the books." His voice was steady. There were eyes on him, and the look in those eyes said more about us than any formality. We had had enough. The legal aftermath wasn't cinematic. It was painstaking and slow, like unpeeling an onion. Complaints were filed, minutes were examined, signatures checked. We pulled together ledgers and receipts, emails that Marla had sent herself to create the illusion of consensus. A petition circulated. In 3 days, more than half the street had signed. People who had never marched about anything in their lives signed their names because they wanted a neighbor to be treated fairly, not to be bullied out of a life they'd worked on. I won't pretend I was a flawless hero in this. I said things in the heat of meetings that later felt sharp, like edges I'd left on purpose. I had my own temper. But the difference between me and Marla was that my anger came from being wronged, not from wanting to hold power. When the board finally met to vote on her removal, the room smelled of coffee and rain, and people slid their ballots across the table with hands that trembled the least for reasons of habit rather than fear. She fought it. Marla planted seeds of doubt. "What about security?" she said. "Who will keep things in order?" And that resonated with those who equate rules with safety. But we were ready with answers, clear bylaws, an interim board, and a commitment to transparency. When the vote came, it wasn't an explosion. It was relief, like the last chapter closing on a long, slow tension. The majority voted to remove her from the board. Her allies deserted her when the ledger couldn't lie. On the day she packed her clipboard into a cardboard box and left the community center, nobody yelled. There was no triumphant music, just the soft sound of a box being closed and the shuffle of papers. We didn't cheer, because this wasn't a movie. It was a life repaired. I went back to my porch, to the creak of the dock and the swans that had no interest in our human squabbles. That night, when the sun went down and the light went thin, I sat in my chair and realized the house felt like home again. But it didn't end with the vote. In quiet ways, the community changed. We started reading the minutes, yes, but we also started talking to each other. People who would have never crossed paths before fixed fences together, planned a cleanup of the inlet, and checked on the older folks down the lane. That small collective attention did more healing than any formal resolution. We learned, the hard way, that vigilance is communal. So here's what I want to leave you with: not a sermon, nothing like that, just this. Power looks tidy on a clipboard, but it smells different when you get close. If you live in a place with an HOA, or a committee, or even a group chat that decides things for your corner of the world, pay attention. Ask for the minutes. Request the receipts. Don't let someone convince you that procedure is the same thing as truth. And if you see someone being bullied into silence, don't assume it's none of your business. Small injustices have a way of getting bigger. Now tell me what you think. Was Marla a villain through and through, or a person who lost her way under a different kind of pressure? Drop a comment with your take on justice, community power, or a time when you had to stand up in your neighborhood. Share this story if it reminds you of someone you know, and subscribe if you want more honest stories about people trying to take care of what they love. Messy, sometimes painful, but worth it.